If there is one true crime thriller that's been requested more than any other topic on my channel, it's undoubtedly David Fincher's Zodiac, and now is the time to finally bite that bullet. Based on the non-fiction book by Robert Graysmith, in addition to further research and interviews to ensure the validity of its claims, Zodiac tells the story of the infamous open case surrounding an unidentified serial killer who terrorized San Francisco between the late 1960s and early 1970s until his presence faded out of the public consciousness. He was especially known for harassing the police and media with cryptic letters and ciphers that, once decoded, indicated his love of the game, as well as further threats of violence that ultimately never came to be, despite taking credit for killings that couldn't be verified as his. To this day, he remains an almost total enigma in American true crime history, as the case went cold as time passed and more pressing crimes and killers emerged to overshadow the brief stranglehold he once held over the Bay Area. In my perspective, the film is masterfully brilliant. It's a 2.5-hour period drama that journeys us through the ever-shifting landscape of San Francisco over 14 years, as industry attitudes and means of communication change and evolve, while the real-life author Robert Graysmith gets stuck in the past in his futile search for answers. It's a very sad but bluntly honest tale about injustice that expands on the themes presented in David Fincher's Seven, where trying to answer the question who is the Zodiac or what motivates him becomes irrelevant to the wider interconnected social spiderweb of how society functions under the malaise of meaningless tragedy. I think a huge part of the film's cult legacy stems from its timeless quality, where we witness the collective despair resulting from progress being hindered by bureaucracy, personal prejudice, myths and disinformation, and natural human apathy, until we become exhausted and defeated and simply have no choice but to move on. And in this case, that also includes the killer himself. Now, for context why this video wasn't made sooner, I actually started making a video on Zodiac back in 2019 and just never got around to finishing it, and ever since, the longer I've eluded it, the more video essays seem to pop up on the topic that in turn just stress me out even more about finishing it, because I'm always fearful of regurgitating what everyone else has already covered. That's not the first time I've said this, and I know I'm just being hyper self-critical and disheartening, which I guess comes with the job, but I do want to recommend 2 videos on the topic that I share the same perspective on, based on explicit commentary made by director David Fincher regarding his intentions when making the film. The first is by Jack's Movie Reviews called Zodiac: The Art of Obsession, and the second is by Renzi called The Crime Film That Solves Nothing, both of which succinctly, if frustratingly for me, encapsulate similar sentiments on the film's recurring emphasis on time jumps, as the story deliberately dissipates into a whimper rather than the idealistic buying of justice we wish were true.
You got me wrong and I got you wrong.
As always, please make sure to leave your own thoughts and theories in the comments below. And just before you brace yourself, if you want to watch Zodiac but don't have it on a streaming service in your country, well, this video's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN, has the solution. A virtual private network protects your digital privacy and allows you to freely surf the web without restriction or fear of being tracked or compromised by your internet service provider, public Wi-Fi, or websites designed to sneakily and invasively snoop on your private activities. However, when it comes to watching my favorite films in the age of inflation and diminishing returns, CyberGhost VPN allows me to unblock geographical restrictions so I can get more value out of streaming services, including those not available in my country. For example, Australia's SBS On Demand has Zodiac legitimately available for free, so all I do is select CyberGhost VPN's optimized streaming location for Australia, refresh the page, set up an account, and I'm good to go. With over 100 locations to encrypt and rewrite your traffic securely, CyberGhost unlocks geo-restricted content in over 40 streaming platforms like Netflix, Disney+, and Paramount+, so you can get the best bang for your buck, and it works on 7 devices at the same time, so you can even share it with your friends and family. CyberGhost VPN has over 38 million users worldwide and over 20,000 excellent reviews on Trustpilot, making it one of the best VPNs available, and by using my link in the description, you can get the best deal of just $2.03 a month plus 4 months for free, which is an 84% discount discount overall. Plus, with a 45-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support, you can try it completely risk-free with nothing to lose, and by doing so, you'll also be helping out my channel as well. The story of Zodiac centers around three core perspectives, who serve as a microcosm for how the Zodiac Killer both directly and indirectly controlled the public through fear, as each protagonist suffers personal hardship as a result. Firstly, we have Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist for the San Francisco Chronicle, who pursues his own personal obsession at the eventual cost of his family and career. Then there's Paul Avery, a renowned journalist whose ego and hubris sees him called out by Zodiac, leading him to paranoia, addiction, and seclusion while living with emphysema. And lastly, there's Detective Dave Toschi, whose investigation gradually fizzles into the ether until he's demoted after being accused of forging a Zodiac letter that he was later exonerated for. Now, I know I've just spoiled the fate of the characters, but this is a prime example of the journey mattering more than the destination, as it plays precisely into the unresolved nature of the conflict. It's the lack of closure and the ensuing desperation and frustration of having to live with the fact that justice will never be served that gives the film its frank and sophisticated edge over most true crime adaptations. I've said it before in a few videos, but there are inherent concerns to the romanticized nature of modern true crime media that Fincher largely subverts by sustaining the mythology of what the Zodiac represents, whilst demystifying the killer as an average citizen who either got bored or more likely was scared off from committing further mayhem as authorities seem to draw closer. To paraphrase David Fincher's own commentary, it became quickly apparent when making the film that this wasn't a traditional murder mystery, but a newspaper story with an obsession with justice and disseminating the idea of what Zodiac meant to those under his shadow. With this comment, I actually find myself comparing it to Tom McCarthy's Spotlight, not just because Mark Ruffalo appears in both films, but because it's similarly a journalistic search for justice that toes a line between impartiality and the raw emotion that becomes entrenched within the truth. The film is predominantly about information and more so how it's communicated, that in Fincher's words is unadorned and almost suppresses conventional cinematic drama in favour of a clinical noir brutalism. After all, the killer scenes take up barely a fraction of the runtime, while the rest is devoted to the circumstances that surround his actions and sustaining the presence that he may strike again. The film's evocative poster is perfectly symbolic for its overall aim. Zodiac is less concerned about solving the mystery than it is exploring a dark, brooding fog that briefly obscured one of the most vibrant and spirited settings in America. As Fincher told MovieWeb.com, the Zodiac is only defined by the people who chase him. He himself is not the point. It's those who kept his presence alive that truly matter to the story. This is actually established in the bleak irony that Fincher bookends the film with, by using contemporary songs to reflect the mood of the time and those left impacted by the killer's actions. The opening uses the song Easy to Be Hard by Three Dog Night that has lyrics like "How can people be so heartless, how can people be so cruel," while the unsuspecting locals celebrate their day of freedom, while a young, loving, free-spirited couple called Darlene and Mike are ruthlessly gunned down by a man drenched in shadows. As Fincher explained in his commentary, the intent of the opening was to present detachment and indifference before the violence erupts, which taps into the innocuous innocence we've lost as a community due to the ease in which wickedness persists, as it often lurks out in the open. The ending then compounds that sadness by flipping to a peace and love song from the same era called Hurdy-Gurdy Man by Donovan, where decades after the fact sees the sole survivor Mike in 1991, now stricken and alone with PTSD, identifying the man who shot him and his lover Darlene in 1969. The reality, however, contradicts the tone of the song, as neither peace nor happiness come as a result of what feels like progress after years of nothing, when the man identified then dies of a heart attack before he can be questioned, once again leaving those still caught in his shadow without closure or justice. In a way, time doesn't heal wounds, it only makes the scars feel more apparent. In a prominent interview with David Halbringer of the New York Times upon the film's release, Fincher expressed his personal connection to the story, having grown up in San Anselmo when the killings took place, and declaring the Zodiac to be the ultimate boogeyman, which is exactly how he's portrayed in his scenes. This is especially noticeable in the second murder of the film, where another young couple called Brian and Cecilia are having a picnic by a secluded, peaceful lake before they're confronted by the Zodiac, now in an outfit of pure blackness. He becomes this unnatural void of living darkness invading daylight as he contrasts against the idyllic setting before restraining the pair and viciously subverting your already dire expectations by suddenly stabbing them instead of using the gun it acutely stresses from the very start. It's a borderline jump scare that immortalizes the Zodiac's disruptive presence on the public going forward, because it adds an air of cruel unpredictability that sees investigators uneager to call his bluff each time he sends a new threat, such as bombings, indiscriminate attacks, and shooting up a school bus, the latter of which being a vivid detail Fincher recalls hearing in his childhood. It's obviously a signature of the Fincher cinematic universe to be cold and matter-of-fact, but perhaps the film's most striking quality is its die-hard authenticity. I've heard some people say the film is a moody, slow burn, but I have to disagree to some extent. While it is mostly a talking film, it's still highly energetic in showcasing how, in between Zodi's attempts to sustain the public's attention, music, fashion, architecture, subcultures, and most day-to-day business continues to change and move on with the times. It isolates Zodi's influence as far less reaching than he wishes it were, and in some ways goes as far as to humanize and figuratively unmask him by placing all the attention and romanticism on a setting that refuses to surrender to his fear-mongering. Rather than the story sensationalizing the drama or devolving into mass hysteria akin to the phantom of the Texarkana moonlight murders that inspired the town that dreaded sundown, the Zodiac's presence is far more realistically muted than one might expect. When Dave Toschi and his addiction to animal crackers is first introduced after he's called to the scene of a cab driver's sudden murder, he interviews two kids who witnessed the killer and describe him as normal, which is a simple phrase that diminishes the shadowy image that Zodi is trying to build of himself. Don't get me wrong, his threat is still very palpable and never ceasing, as exemplified in a scene involving a woman and her baby surviving an attempted kidnapping and murder, where the killer uses his charming innocence to deceive her. But again, Fincher denies him authority over the narrative, instead focusing squarely on the victims and those around him. It all goes back to what Fincher said to MovieWeb.com about Zodiac being defined by those who chased him, as he further told Chud.com, "I wanted the movie to take its toll on the audience. I wanted the audience to feel like they went through the ringer with these guys." He noted the intentional lack of action and added frustration as it ponders over every meticulous thread of information that ultimately goes nowhere. Hell, at one point Dave claims that the Zodiac is breaking the pattern and that's how he's remained undetected, when in reality no pattern was ever formed in the first place. Even Robert immediately clues into this futility in the first cipher when Zodi claims it contains his identity, and Rob tells Avery he's naive to think Zodi would actually give himself up that easily, which eventually ends up being a hopeful naivety Robert himself falls for when his later investigation makes him face his own initial futility. While Robert suspects the Zodiac is well read, that doesn't make him some cunning intellect. If anything, he's just extremely obtuse for attention. But at the same time, that's all it takes to cause a frenzy when we start looking for rationale when there really isn't any. As details grow more overwhelming and convoluted, it becomes clear that for a story about deciphering codes and meaning, humanity struggles more so to decipher its own beliefs from the facts, with both Toschi and Graysmith eventually fixating on the same individual, Arthur Lee Allen, a former teacher convicted of molesting his students, whose all too curious statements, peculiar behaviour, and obvious circumstances have kept him as the prime suspect to this very day. Hell, Toshi even blatantly admits as much by the end, when he questions if he's targeting Arthur purely in desperation for this to finally be over, even if deep in his soul he knows Arthur has to be the guy. By the middle of the film, the urgency perpetuated by the constant time jumps combined with the surmounting leads that bring less and less closure sees the tower of information collapse. Arthur becomes such a confident, surefire fit only for all the evidence to be circumstantial, culminating in acceptance of defeat when Robert approaches Toshi for the first time outside a showing of Dirty Harry, a film inspired by Toshi and the Zodiac killings, in a bid to reassure him he will eventually catch the killer, only for Toshi to exhaustively declare in an almost meta sense that they're already making movies about it. This leads to a cool black screen 4-year time skip that emphasizes how those involved have grown apathetic and moved on, such as Toshi's partner transferring to fraud to focus on his work-life balance, and Avery moving to the Sacramento Bee and falling into seclusion, even if the open case still rests in the back of their minds. The last hour of Zodiac is probably the reason the film elevates itself beyond most procedural true crime stories, because it almost works as this depressingly extended epilogue that deliberately stretches itself thin and keeps itself on life support as Robert attempts to reinvigorate enthusiasm in the case and spirals into obsession trying to write a book on the matter. Now, I actually have read the book, and I'll admit it's a bit of a slog that's just as cumbersome as the film itself, in how Graysmith zigzags in different directions and hones in on very specific suspects, but it was undeniably crucial in bringing Zodiac back into the public consciousness in the hopes of closure. However, for the purposes of the film's final half, Robert's obsession returns us back to the detachment and indifference Fincher described about the opening of the film. Robert dredges up the past by trying to connect discarded information with new findings and eventually finds himself on the search for a man called Rick Marshall that ultimately leads down another dead end. While he does initially rekindle Toshi's interest, after Toshi is demoted for allegedly forging a Zodiac letter in a bid to revitalize his career, he still accepts the case will remain an injustice and explains that all Robert can really do at this point is satisfy his own curiosity by writing the book. This is the crucial detail to the final hour of the film. It's a personal journey that Robert doesn't realize he's on, even failing to see Avery as a cautionary tale. Robert is the only one still hoping for justice when it's fundamentally futile like he believed at the start. Because, as I said earlier, Zodiac has become old news at this point, with more urgent matters overshadowing a killer who has also moved on from his own shenanigans.
Too much time has gone by, okay? Too much of the evidence is lost. People get old, Robert, they forget.
It's heartbreaking to watch Robert's wife Melanie see her husband detaching himself from the present to live in the past, especially as he starts receiving ominous phone calls where the caller does not speak, eventually causing her to divorce Robert and take the kids as he buries himself under mountains of data that's inconclusive. Robert's efforts are noble, but his final scene subtly cements that even if he does solve the case himself, he's powerless to bring justice. He eventually points to the elusive Arthur Lee Allen and manages to track him down in 1983, only for them to briefly stare at each other, leaving it ambiguous if Arthur recognizes him, as their facial expressions convey nuance. Until Robert, perhaps out of fear, pride, or pure hopelessness, simply walks away. The moment perfectly encapsulates everything that the story has been about. It's so satisfyingly unsatisfying. As Fincher said, it remains faithful to the truth and the reality of the situation. What can they do if everything is circumstantial? The ending is the brutal cherry on top, when Robert's best-selling book brings Arthur's suspicion back to light, leading Mike, who survived the shooting in 1969, to identify his shooter 22 years later, pointing to Arthur with mostly certainty. However, before investigators can take another stab at justice and interrogate him, Arthur dies of a fucking heart attack in 1992, and despite DNA results refuting his involvement, he remains to this day the one and only suspect whose death and the subsequent lack of closure naturally came with the passing of time. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching, and thanks again to CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring this video and helping to keep the lights on. Remember, you can use my link in the description to get an 84% discount plus 4 free months, along with a risk-free 45-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. As always, stay safe, stay away from Ted Cruz, some of you will get that reference, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.
Yeah, you felt it.